She was starving, shaking with hunger, and holding the only meal she could afford that day. Everyone told her to ignore the crippled beggar outside her shop. But when she gave him her food, her life split into a before and an after she never saw coming. She woke before sunrise in her rented room, the ceiling stained with old leaks and broken promises. Her stomach already ached, but she ignored it, tying her hair neatly and slipping into her faded uniform. Today was payday, but she knew most of it would disappear into rent and bus fare. On the walk to the shop, she counted coins in her pocket, enough for one cheap meal if she skipped dinner. Hunger had become familiar. Like an unwanted roommate, she couldn't evict anymore from her fragile, exhausting life. The clothing store sat on a busy street where people hurried past without looking at each other. She arrived early, sweeping the floor and straightening hangers before the manager came. Her coworkers chatted about movies, dinners, and weekend plans she couldn't afford to imagine. When the doors opened, customers poured in, touching fabrics, asking prices, bargaining hard. She smiled through it all, her voice gentle, her feet aching by noon. By lunchtime, her hands trembled slightly, but she kept folding shirts, pretending she didn't notice her empty stomach growling loudly. Outside the glass door, as always, sat the beggar. He leaned against the wall, legs twisted, clothes worn thin, a metal bowl resting near his hand. Most people stepped around him like he was invisible. Some whispered insults, others laughed. She had noticed him weeks ago, how he never begged loudly, never chased anyone. He just watched the street with tired eyes. Sometimes their gazes met through the glass, and she felt an uncomfortable pull in her chest she tried hard to ignore. When her break finally came, she reached into her bag and pulled out her lunch. A small portion of rice and lentils wrapped carefully in paper, cooked the night before. The smell made her mouth water instantly. She sat on a stool near the back, taking a breath before opening it. As she lifted the first bite, her eyes drifted to the window again. The beggar hadn't eaten all day. She could tell. His shoulders were slumped, his bowl still empty. Her conscience began to argue with her hunger. If she gave him the food, she would be dizzy all afternoon. If she didn't, she would still feel dizzy, but with guilt added. She remembered her mother's voice from childhood, soft but firm, saying kindness mattered most when it cost you something. She wrapped the food back up slowly, her hands hesitating. Then she stood, heart pounding, and walked toward the door before fear or logic could stop her completely. The bell chimed as she stepped outside. The beggar looked up, startled, clearly not expecting her. She knelt beside him, ignoring the dust on the ground and the curious stares. "Please eat," she said quietly, placing the food near his bowl. He stared at it, then at her, disbelief flickering across his face. "This is all I have today," she added with a small, apologetic smile, as if she were the one asking for forgiveness instead. Before he could respond, laughter erupted behind her. One coworker leaned out the door, scoffing loudly. "Are you crazy?" Giving food to him. Another shook her head. The manager stormed forward, face red with irritation. "Do you want customers to think this is a charity?" he snapped. "Get back inside. We don't encourage beggars here." The words burned, but she didn't move. She met the beggar's eyes once more, silently urging him to eat before anyone took it away. The beggar's hands shook as he unwrapped the food. He whispered, "Thank you," so softly she almost missed it. She stood, brushing dust from her knees, and turned back toward the shop. The manager grabbed her arm briefly, lowering his voice. "One more stunt like this and you're gone," he warned. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Inside, her co-workers avoided her gaze. As she returned to work, hunger clawed harder, but something inside her felt strangely lighter, The afternoon dragged on painfully. Her vision blurred at times, and she leaned against the counter when no one was watching. Customers complained, the register jammed, and her manager scolded her twice more. Still, she said nothing. When her shift finally ended, she stepped outside, exhausted and empty. The street buzzed with evening noise. She looked toward the wall where the beggar sat, ready to offer a shy smile. But instead, she froze, her breath catching in her throat. The beggar was standing. He stood straight, no longer leaning against the wall, no longer twisted or broken the way everyone believed. His back was firm, his shoulders squared, and his eyes, those tired eyes, now held a calm strength that made the noise of the street feel suddenly distant. She blinked hard, thinking hunger had finally made her hallucinate. Her legs felt weak, and she gripped her bag strap as if it might anchor her to reality. People passing by slowed, some stopping entirely. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Wasn't he crippled? How is he standing? Is this some trick? The beggar, or the man who had been pretending to be one, looked around calmly, as if he had stepped onto a stage he knew well. He rolled his shoulders once, almost casually, then looked directly at her. His gaze softened when it met her stunned expression. She took a step back, her voice barely working. "Why you stood," she said, feeling foolish the moment the words left her mouth. He smiled gently, not mocking, not proud. "Yes," he replied, "because I never needed the crutches. Only the test." Her heart hammered painfully. "Test," she echoed, her thoughts racing. Behind her, the manager pushed through the small crowd, face pale now instead of angry. The man nodded slowly. "I have been sitting here for weeks," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, watching people walk past. Some looked. Most didn't. A few laughed. Some kicked my bowl away. Murmurs spread through the crowd. "But today," he continued, turning fully toward her, "one person chose to see me as human." He paused, then said the words quietly, meant only for her, yet somehow heard by all. "I'm a billionaire." The street seemed to stop breathing. Someone laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. Others stared, waiting for proof. She felt dizzy again, but this time not from hunger. "That's not funny," her manager muttered, trying to regain control. "You can't just—" He stopped mid-sentence as black cars pulled up smoothly along the curb. Doors opened. Men in tailored suits stepped out, scanning the area with sharp eyes. Silence fell instantly. One of the men approached the former beggar with clear respect. "Sir," he said quietly, "we were about to intervene." The billionaire shook his head. "No." This was necessary. He turned back to her. "I run a foundation," he explained, his voice steady. "But money given without understanding changes little. I wanted to see how people behave when there's nothing to gain." His eyes held hers. "You gave when you had nothing." Her knees nearly buckled. I was hungry too," she said honestly, embarrassed by how small her voice sounded. He smiled again, this time with warmth that felt almost fatherly. "That is exactly why it matters." The crowd erupted into overlapping voices. Some apologized loudly. Others defended themselves. The coworkers who had mocked her stared at the ground, faces burning with shame. The manager swallowed hard, suddenly very aware of his earlier threats. The billionaire gestured toward the shop behind her. "This young woman works here," he said. She was mocked for her kindness, scolded for it. He turned to the manager. "Is that how you treat your staff?" The manager stammered excuses, sweat forming at his temples. I didn't know, sir." The billionaire's expression didn't change. "No," he said calmly. "You didn't care." He then reached into his coat and handed her a small card. Come to this address tomorrow morning, he said. Eat well tonight. Rest. She stared at the card, her hands trembling as she accepted it. I don't understand, she whispered. You will, he replied. One of the suited men pressed a bag gently into her other hand. Dinner, he said with a respectful nod. Tears filled her eyes instantly. As the cars drove away and the crowd slowly dispersed, she stood frozen, clutching the bag and the card. The street returned to its usual noise, but nothing felt the same. Her co-workers avoided her, unsure what to say. The manager retreated inside, without another word. She walked home in a daze, hunger forgotten now, heart pounding with fear and hope tangled tightly together. That night, as she ate a full meal for the first time in weeks, she realized her life had already changed. She barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him standing up, heard his calm voice, saying those impossible words. The card lay on the small table beside her bed, stared at like it might vanish if she stopped looking at it. At dawn, she finally gave up on sleep, washed her face, and put on her cleanest clothes. Her hands shook as she left her room, fear whispering that this was all some elaborate joke. The address led her to the richest part of the city, a place she had only seen from buses that never stopped there. Tall gates opened silently as she approached, and a uniformed guard checked her name before nodding respectfully. She felt out of place, clutching her worn bag, surrounded by polished stone and quiet fountains. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and flowers. Her heart pounded so loudly she worried everyone could hear it. A woman greeted her kindly and led her into a large room filled with sunlight. And there he was, no longer a beggar, dressed simply but elegantly, sitting at a long table. He stood when he saw her, smiling warmly. You came, he said. Of course, she replied, unsure where to look. I didn't know if I should. He gestured for her to sit. Please. Today is about listening, not doubting yourself. Breakfast was served, more food than she had seen at once in years. She hesitated, then ate slowly, savoring every bite. He watched quietly, not impatient, not judgmental. When she finished, he leaned back slightly. Tell me about yourself, he said. She laughed nervously. There's not much to tell. I work. I pay rent. I survive. He shook his head gently. That's not survival, he said. That's endurance. She spoke about her childhood, her parents' early deaths, the jobs she'd taken to stay afloat. She spoke about hunger, about pretending to be strong. He listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. People think kindness is easy, he said when she finished. But real kindness is painful. It asks for sacrifice. He paused. Yesterday you paid a price, and you didn't expect a reward. She looked down, embarrassed. I didn't do it to be noticed, she said. I just couldn't eat while someone else starved. He nodded slowly. That is exactly why I test people this way, he replied. Power reveals character, but poverty reveals it faster. He stood and walked to the window. I built my wealth from nothing. Along the way, I saw how quickly people forget empathy once they feel safe. He turned back to her. I'm not here to give you money and send you away, he said. That would change your comfort, not your destiny. Her breath caught. Then why am I here? She asked softly. He smiled. Because I want to offer you a chance to grow into the person you already are. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents, plans, and her name typed neatly at the top. It's a scholarship, he explained. Education, training, and a position in my foundation afterward if you choose. Her eyes widened. Me, she whispered. I've never studied beyond basic school. He shrugged lightly. Neither did I once. Ability matters more than background. Tears spilled over before she could stop them. Why trust me? She asked. His voice was firm but gentle. Because you trusted a stranger when it hurt. She signed the papers with trembling hands, still half afraid she would wake up. When she stood to leave, he stopped her. One more thing, he said. Your manager contacted me this morning. Her stomach twisted. Am I in trouble? He shook his head. No. He is. He smiled faintly. Kindness doesn't erase injustice. It exposes it. As she stepped back into the city, everything looked the same, yet felt completely different. The streets were still crowded. The noise still loud. But for the first time, her future wasn't a wall, it was a door. And she knew, deep down, that her single act of compassion had not only changed her life, but had reminded a powerful man why he began testing humanity in the first place. The weeks that followed felt unreal, like she had stepped into someone else's life and was afraid to breathe too hard in case it shattered. She resigned from the clothing shop quietly. Her manager barely met her eyes, his confidence gone, his voice small. No one mocked her now. Some co-workers apologized, others stayed silent. She didn't feel anger toward them anymore, only distance, as if that chapter had already closed behind her without noise. Her first day at the foundation was overwhelming. The building buzzed with purpose, not pressure. People smiled, not out of politeness, but sincerity. She was given books, schedules, and mentors who spoke to her like she belonged there. At night, she studied until her eyes burned, afraid of wasting the chance she'd been handed. Hunger no longer gnawed at her body, but a different hunger had taken its place, the need to prove she was worthy. Sometimes, on the way home, she passed the street where the shop was. The wall where the beggar had once sat looked ordinary now, almost dull. Yet she felt a quiet reverence every time she saw it. That single spot had split her life in two. One evening, she noticed a real homeless man sitting there, ignored by passers-by. Without hesitation, she stopped, knelt, and shared her dinner. No cameras, no audience, just instinct. Months passed. She learned about logistics, ethics, community outreach. She accompanied teams into neglected neighborhoods, listening to stories that mirrored her own past. The billionaire watched her progress from a distance, rarely interfering, occasionally asking questions that cut straight to the heart. Are we helping to feel good? He once asked her. Or helping to make people whole? The question stayed with her long after the meeting ended. Her confidence grew quietly. She spoke up in meetings, proposed ideas, challenged assumptions. People listened. One afternoon, she was asked to lead a small project, her first. It focused on food security for retail workers living paycheck to paycheck. She poured herself into it, remembering her own trembling hands, her hidden hunger. When the pilot program succeeded, applause filled the room. She smiled, but inside, she cried for the girl she used to be. Not everyone celebrated her rise. Online whispers began after a journalist uncovered the story of the beggar billionaire. Some accused her of being planted, an actress a lucky pawn. The comments hurt more than she expected. She questioned herself late at night, wondering if the world truly believed kindness could exist without strategy. When she confessed this to him, he listened carefully, then said, "Truth doesn't need defending. It needs consistency." The foundation expanded its programs, inspired by that single test on the street. This time, there were no disguises, no tricks, only systems built to reward compassion sustainably. She helped design them, insisting dignity come first. No one should have to perform their pain, she said firmly during one discussion. The billionaire nodded approvingly. You're no longer the test subject, he told her. You're the compass. One evening, he invited her to dinner, not as a mentor, not as an employer, but as an equal voice. They talked about mistakes, regrets, and the loneliness of responsibility. Wealth isolates, he admitted. Poverty does too, just in different ways. She realized then that he hadn't only been testing humanity on that street. He had been testing himself, searching for proof that goodness still existed without incentives. She began speaking publicly, reluctantly at first, then with growing strength. She never mentioned money, never dramatized the moment.
She talked about choice.
About seconds where no one is watching. That's where character lives, she told audiences. After one talk, a young woman approached her, eyes shining. "I share my lunch today," she said proudly. The chain had begun, quiet but unstoppable. Late one night, as she reviewed reports alone in her office, she paused and looked out at the city lights. She thought about hunger, about fear, about the weight of a simple decision. She understood now that the miracle wasn't the billionaire standing up. It was that kindness had stood first, unnoticed, unsupported, and strong enough to change everything that followed. Years later, the city barely remembered the clothing shop or the manager who once scolded a starving girl for showing mercy. But people remembered the programs that fed thousands quietly, the scholarships that lifted families out of cycles they thought were permanent. At the center of many of those stories was her, not as a symbol, not as a miracle, but as a steady presence who listened more than she spoke and acted when action was needed most. She still lived simply, choosing a modest apartment despite offers of luxury. "I don't want to forget," she often said when asked why. Forgetting, she believed, was the first step toward indifference. Each morning, she walked part of the city instead of driving, watching faces, noticing hands, remembering how easy it was to disappear among crowds. Success hadn't erased her past. It had sharpened her awareness of how thin the line between comfort and desperation truly was. The billionaire grew older, slower, but his mind remained sharp. He called her into his office one afternoon, the sunlight softer now, his hair more silver than dark. "It's time," he said simply. She frowned. "Time for what?" He smiled faintly. "For you to lead what you already carry." He slid a document across the desk, naming her as director of the Foundation's daily operations. Her breath caught, fear and honor colliding inside her chest. "I don't know if I can," she admitted, the old doubt resurfacing. He looked at her steadily. "You already have," he replied. "Leadership isn't about authority. It's about responsibility you don't walk away from." She accepted, knowing the weight would be heavy but familiar. Hunger had taught her endurance. Kindness had taught her direction. Together, they formed a strength she no longer questioned. On the anniversary of that day outside the shop, she returned to the street alone. The city had changed, new signs, new stores, but the pavement remembered. She stood where the wall once held a man everyone ignored. Closing her eyes, she could almost hear the traffic, the laughter, the manager's voice, her own heartbeat. She whispered a quiet thank you, not to fate, not to wealth, but to the courage that had pushed her forward when fear told her to stay still. A small boy sat nearby with his mother, sharing a piece of bread. The boy noticed her watching and smiled shyly. Without thinking, she approached and knelt, asking about his day, his dreams. The mother thanked her, surprised by the attention more than the help. As she walked away, she felt the familiar warmth in her chest. It wasn't pride. It was alignment, the feeling of living in truth with herself. News eventually broke when the billionaire passed away peacefully, leaving behind a letter that was shared publicly. In it, he wrote about the test that changed him more than anyone else. "I sat on a street pretending to be broken," the letter said, "but it was I who needed proof that humanity still stood. One hungry girl fed me. In doing so, She restored my faith and reshaped my legacy. The world listened this time. The story went viral, retold in countless ways. Some exaggerated it, some doubted it, some turned it into inspiration posters and speeches. She never corrected them. The truth didn't belong to her anymore. What mattered was what people did after hearing it. Donations increased, yes, but so did volunteer numbers, food drives, quiet acts of generosity that never made headlines. The ripple continued, far beyond her control. One evening, after a long day, she sat alone with a simple meal, pausing before the first bite. Old habits died slowly. She smiled at herself and began to eat, grateful but unafraid now. She understood that sacrifice wasn't about suffering forever. It was about choosing others without erasing yourself. Kindness, when rooted in self-respect, multiplied instead of depleting. And somewhere on busy streets around the world, hungry people still walked past others in need. Most kept going. Some didn't. Those few moments, quiet, unseen, costly, were where destinies still shifted. Her life stood as proof that when kindness rises before comfort, it doesn't just change a moment. It changes who we become, and sometimes, it changes the entire world watching silently from the other side of the glass. Kindness rarely announces itself. It doesn't wait for applause, cameras, or permission. It happens in quiet moments, when no one is watching, when choosing compassion costs more than it gives. A hungry girl gave away her only meal, expecting nothing in return, and the world changed, not because a billionaire stood up, but because humanity did. If this story moved you, remember this. Destiny doesn't always arrive with noise or warning. Sometimes it sits outside your door, ignored by everyone else, waiting for a single brave heart to notice. Be that heart, because the smallest act of kindness, done in silence, can rewrite a life, maybe even your own.